how would you say the speech by Li Qiang, as well as the reception from the audience at this Davos, actually compares to past performances by Chinese leaders?
Well, the only other real comparison that needs to be made is with Xi Jinping's speech at Davos in January of 2017. And what a difference 7 years makes. When Xi was there 7 years ago, he took Davos by storm through a very forward-leaning speech suggesting China could provide public goods for the rest of the world and be an important steward of the global economy. He highlighted the Belt and Road, contrasted China's growing openness with the U.S., which was in the midst of inaugurating Donald Trump. 7 years later, Li Qiang was much more defensive. He had to say that the world could trust China, that China keeps its word, and that China's market is not a risk but an opportunity. And he didn't mention the Belt and Road at all. So despite sending a very large delegation and making news by announcing the 5.2% growth rate for 2023, my guess is that the audience still came away rather skeptical of the message that Li Qiang was trying to convey.
And one of the key points that he made sure to mention was the fact that China wasn't using any more risky or short-term measures in order to prop up the economy. But at the same time, Bloomberg is now learning that they want to also have more stimulus for the economy, more than $100 billion of special bonds. How does that compare to real action on the ground?
Yeah, actually, I think I understand why he didn't want to emphasize the stimulus, because he didn't want to suggest that the Chinese had made any kinds of mistakes. Committing mistakes is just not part of being a CCP official these days. On the other hand, I think actually if he had said, we're going to have a larger stimulus, that would have been actually reassuring. I think if he had said, here's a date for the third plenum, well, we'll announce a whole variety of reforms, that would have been reassuring. If he had announced plans, real policies for cross-border data flows and government procurement, rather than saying that plans were coming, that would have been reassuring. So there could have been a whole variety of things that he could have said that would have been reassuring to that audience that he left off the table.
Scott, as you say, it may have been underwhelming for the audience, and I have to say you sound a little underwhelmed as well. Do you think that the domestic challenges, the economic challenges, the fact that we know that there are yet more purges and corruption campaigns underway as well, is that really hindering, at the end of the day, Beijing's ability to take that global leadership role, which was so trumpeted by Xi in his Davos speech there, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's partly that there's these domestic challenges. You've got these corruption cases, challenges with the military, former Minister of Foreign Affairs to handle. But Xi Jinping is just, it comes down to him and the direction that he's taken China. If you go back to the speech of January 2017, he said he wanted China to be a steward of multilateralism and provide global public goods. And given the amount of industrial policy we've seen, the frictions with the United States, which is caused both by Beijing and Washington, it just doesn't look that way. Today, Li Qiang did not mention Ukraine at all. There was a meeting at Davos that the Ukrainians hosted, which the Chinese skipped. There was no mention today about the Taiwan Strait, which is one of the biggest things that CEOs are worried about. He could have tried to provide reassurance about that. So I think there's a direction that China is going, which is just running counter to the concerns of global business people, and most importantly, to the Chinese private sector, which is the biggest source of employment and growth in China.
The other thing that we've been watching is this idea of high quality growth, right, which feeds into a lot of the themes that we've just touched on. But at the core of this new growth strategy are things like electric vehicles, battery technology, AI technology, chips. Is all of this just going to feed into inevitably, even more heightened tensions with global trading partners, particularly as we go into a US election year?
Sure. I think as long as Bloomberg has been reporting on China through this program, Chinese officials have been talking about the importance of high-quality growth. That's been a constant, right? For decades, they've been emphasizing that. But now the question is that high-quality growth going to be something that is shared with the rest of the world, or is it going to divide the world between Chinese winners and losers elsewhere. And so I think there's a real concern that Chinese industrial policy, while it is generating high value growth for China, might be putting the auto sectors or energy industries elsewhere at risk. And so we've got to figure out a way that Chinese economic policy is growth creating for everyone in the region and in the U.S. I do think that there's a good argument to be made for that, but sitting in Washington, I can't tell you the level of skepticism that I encounter here, and we're going to hear about it all 2024 during the presidential campaign.
Scott, and of course, in the past few weeks, we've been really focused on what was happening in Taiwan with the elections there. It was really interesting that this week, China actually decided to publish that old speech by President Xi Jinping telling officials in the Communist Party to do a better job at winning the hearts of the Taiwanese people given the election of Lai Ching-te. How do you expect the tensions in the Taiwan Strait to play out in the next few years? And what are the risks and implications for the economies of these two territories?
Sure. Well, I mean, China can't give up the goal of unification for sure, and it can't renounce that it will never use force. But its strategy of the past few years in the run-up to all of these elections obviously hasn't worked. Taiwanese voters haven't followed the instructions from Beijing. And China's military capabilities are quite impressive, but there's a balance of power because of the United States and the rest of the world paying attention. So they've got to go back to a different playbook. And I guess he's partly pulling that out and saying, for the next few months, we've also got to figure out how to try and stabilize things. Also, you can't play all your tough cards just at the election outcome. There's still several months before the inauguration, and there's much more to do. So it's going to be dicey. I do think that the U.S. And China are talking a lot about Taiwan and trying to avoid a crisis. So I think there'll be a lot of heartburn, but I also think that there's a way to navigate through this so that the world's global economy and a conflict doesn't emerge, because it really is unnecessary.
万事不求人，私人助理、私人顾问时代来临了。六度万事，万事相助，超强博士群不断奉献专项服务，信息、财经、健康、文娱、教育、旅游、消费、科技、美食，让您的生活品质全线升级。六度世界，现在体验，请去3w.6度.world。
限时免费期间，全体注册网友免费使用付费版的高级功能如下：支持论坛搜索，免费画图。第一步，点击右上角最左边的机器人符号开始对话，像图片中红框中的那样。第二步，如图选择六度万事，我们未来将推出更多的 AI 供大家选择。然后就可以与六博士悄悄畅谈了。还支持论坛内部信息搜索哦。您还可以让六博士做你的助手，帮你绘制漂亮图片。最后可以点击添加好友进来，一起与六博士工作。一起来3w.6度.world尝试吧。